After 20 years of marriage, he thought he knew her completely, until one weekend trip revealed a shocking secret she'd kept hidden. What happens when trust is shattered beyond repair? In San Francisco, a city known for its foggy mornings and bustling energy, Michael felt his world beginning to unravel. The weekend trip he and his wife, Jessica, had planned was supposed to be a brief escape from their daily routines. Married for nearly 20 years, Michael, 49, was a methodical, detail-oriented man known for his loyalty and resilience. Working as a financial analyst, he valued precision and integrity, both in his career and personal life. Jessica, now 46, was his opposite, a free-spirited woman with a passion for art, drawn to creativity and spontaneity. Their lives had once been a perfect balance of Michael's structure and Jessica's energy, a blend that seemed unbreakable. They checked into the Bayview Retreat, a boutique hotel on the outskirts of San Francisco, where the air was tinged with the scent of eucalyptus and the distant hum of the bay. Jessica had been the one to suggest the trip, claiming she needed to recharge away from the city noise. Michael had hesitated initially, as deadlines loomed at work, but her enthusiasm won him over. Their first stop was the Blue Fog Lounge, a cozy spot with dim lighting, smooth jazz, and a panoramic view of the bay. They ordered a light dinner and shared a bottle of their favorite wine. Jessica, her eyes sparkling with laughter that reminded Michael of their younger days, seemed especially vibrant that evening. They shared stories, reminiscing about moments that once made them inseparable. Her hand brushed his now and then, and her gaze felt both familiar and new, a glimpse of the Jessica he had fallen in love with. But despite the warmth of the evening, Michael couldn't shake an underlying unease. Every so often, Jessica's gaze drifted, her mind seemingly miles away. "Is everything okay?" he asked gently. She laughed, a soft, light-hearted sound. "Yes, of course. I was just thinking about all the things we've been through." He nodded, trying to believe her, but a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. A sense of something slipping away seemed to settle, even as they sat together, sharing what should have been a moment of closeness. Later, as they walked through the dimly lit halls of the Bayview Retreat toward their room, Michael felt a strange mix of hope and anxiety. He wanted this weekend to rekindle something between them, to bring them closer, yet his instincts told him that something had changed. Once in their room, they continued talking late into the night, discussing their future plans and recalling past adventures. Michael felt comforted by the familiarity of their conversation, but there was an underlying tension he couldn't ignore. Eventually, Jessica drifted off to sleep, yet Michael lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside and the soft patter of rain against the window. As he watched her sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was just out of reach. The next morning, Michael awoke to find Jessica gone. She had left a note on the bedside table, saying she had gone for a walk by the waterfront, a spot they often visited when they needed time to reflect or reconnect. He dressed quickly and went out to find her, eventually spotting her sitting on a bench overlooking the mist-covered water, her face serene yet pensive. He approached quietly, and she turned to him with a faint, distant smile. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing the weight of her thoughts. "Yes," she replied softly. "I just needed a bit of time to think." Michael sat down beside her, tempted to press further but choosing to respect her silence. He felt the growing distance between them, a subtle shift that hinted at something larger, something he couldn't quite name. Determined to make the most of their time away, Michael suggested they explore the town nearby. They wandered through eclectic shops, laughed over quirky souvenirs, and took photos by the Golden Gate Bridge, savoring the feeling of being carefree again. Jessica seemed lighter, her laughter genuine, and for a brief moment, the tension from the night before faded, leaving only the two of them, as they once were, young, in love, and lost in each other's presence. Michael quietly renewed his hope that this weekend could bring them back together. That evening, they returned to the hotel and decided to dine at the Bayview's main restaurant, the Eucalyptus Room. The atmosphere was warm, with soft lighting and the low hum of jazz, creating an intimate ambience. They shared a delicious meal, and Jessica seemed more at ease, her smile reaching her eyes as they reminisced about their favorite memories and discussed their future. At one point, Michael caught her glancing away, her expression faltering slightly, and when she looked back, he noticed a flicker of something in her gaze, regret, perhaps, or uncertainty. Trying to dismiss his unease, he asked, "Jessica, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she replied, meeting his gaze with a hint of curiosity. "Have you ever thought about just leaving everything behind? Starting over somewhere new?" She paused, her eyes drifting past him, as though searching for the right words. "Sometimes, yes. Don't you?" Michael nodded, caught off guard by her response. "I suppose we all wonder about it at some point. But why now?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "I don't know. I guess I just wonder what life would be like if things had gone differently." Her vague response left Michael feeling unsettled, but he forced a reassuring smile. "We've built a life together, Jessica. It may not be perfect, but it's ours." She nodded slowly, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere as they returned to their room in silence. As they walked down the dim hallway, Michael felt the tension between them, like an invisible barrier he couldn't cross. That night, after Jessica fell asleep, Michael lay awake, her question replaying in his mind. The idea of starting over stirred a wave of uncertainty he hadn't felt in years. He slipped quietly from the bed and stood by the window, looking out over the softly glowing cityscape. The fog lay thick over the bay, masking the world outside in a serene haze, but within him, a storm brewed. The following morning, he awoke to find Jessica standing by the window, her eyes distant as she gazed over the misty skyline. She didn't notice him stirring, and for a moment, Michael watched her in silence, struck by how unreachable she seemed, as if she were already somewhere else. Before he could speak, she glanced down at her phone, her lips curving into a faint smile before she quickly tucked it away. "Good morning," she said, turning to him with a warmth that seemed forced. "Morning," he replied, searching her face. He decided not to mention what he had seen, but a sinking feeling settled in his chest. They spent the day hiking along a scenic trail near the coastline, the autumn leaves vibrant underfoot. At one point, they stopped to admire the view, and Michael wrapped his arms around Jessica, feeling the warmth of her against him. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt right. Just as he began to feel a sense of calm, her phone buzzed again. She shifted slightly, pulling away to glance at the screen, and he noticed a quick, almost anxious smile before she slipped the phone back into her pocket. "Who's that?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just work," she replied, brushing it off with a casual smile. But in her eyes, he caught a flash of something, anxiety, perhaps, or guilt, that he couldn't ignore. Later, back at the Bayview retreat, they enjoyed a quiet dinner, but Michael's unease had grown. Midway through the meal, Jessica excused herself, saying she needed to make an urgent call. He watched her step out of the dining room, her voice fading as she spoke quietly into the phone. For a brief moment, he considered following her, but he held back, telling himself that he needed to trust her, even as doubts gnawed at his mind. When she returned, her demeanor was more distant, her smile less genuine. That night, as they lay side by side in bed, the silence between them felt like an impassable gulf. He closed his eyes, willing himself to ignore the whispers of doubt. But as he lay there, the memories of the past few days replayed in his mind, each one adding to his growing sense of dread. In the days following their return to San Francisco, Michael tried to push aside his suspicions, telling himself that he was overthinking things. Yet, Jessica seemed quieter, often lost in her thoughts, and he noticed that her attention would drift at odd moments. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, her phone buzzed repeatedly. She glanced at it, her face tense, before excusing herself to take care of something for work. Michael watched her leave the room, the silence pressing in on him as he listened to her muffled voice from the hallway. When she returned, her smile seemed forced, her words almost rehearsed as she brushed off his concerns. "Everything okay?" he asked, hoping for reassurance. "Yes, nothing to worry about," she replied, too quickly. But the shadow in her eyes remained, and Michael could feel the cracks widening in their once solid foundation. The feeling of betrayal hovered at the edges of his mind, creeping closer with each passing day. Desperate for answers, he began to examine their shared bank statements, hoping to put his fears to rest. His heart sank as he noticed a series of transactions at an unfamiliar place, the Golden Gate Suites, a downtown hotel he had never visited. The dates matched nights when Jessica had claimed to be working late or meeting friends. A wave of nausea washed over Michael as he processed what he had found. The suspicions he had tried to ignore were now impossible to deny. He realized he needed to confront this truth, no matter how painful. That night, Michael stayed quiet, his mind racing with thoughts. He knew he couldn't confront her yet, not without more proof. The next day, under the pretense of a work meeting, he left the house early and positioned himself outside the Golden Gate Suites. Hours passed as he waited, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The bustling city carried on around him, but his world had narrowed to this single moment. And then, he saw her. Jessica approached the entrance, her head turning subtly as though she was making sure no one she knew was nearby. She walked through the doors with a sense of familiarity, and Michael's heart sank. He waited a few moments before following, carefully keeping his distance. Inside, he watched from across the lobby as the receptionist greeted her with a knowing smile and handed her a key card. This wasn't a casual visit, she had clearly been here before. As Michael took in the scene, an undeniable truth settled over him: this wasn't the Jessica he thought he knew. He exited the hotel and waited outside, a storm of emotions brewing within him. Minutes felt like hours until he finally saw her again. She left the building with a man by her side, someone Michael didn't recognize. They walked together, their shoulders brushing as they exchanged quiet words, completely oblivious to his presence. Watching them, Michael felt an emptiness open inside him, a hollow ache that no words could fill. For a moment, he wanted to confront them both right there, to demand answers. But as he stood there, frozen by betrayal, he realized that words wouldn't bring back what he had lost. The truth was stark and final, leaving no room for explanations or apologies. That night, Michael returned home, numb from what he had witnessed. He sat in silence, replaying the images in his mind, each one a painful reminder of the life he thought he knew. When Jessica walked through the door, he met her gaze with a calm he didn't feel. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but cold. Jessica's expression shifted from surprise to fear as she sensed the seriousness in his tone. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Where were you today?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. I had a meeting," she stammered, her gaze faltering. "Don't lie to me, Jessica," he replied, his voice sharper now, the anger breaking through. "I know where you were. I saw you at the Golden Gate Suites, with him." Her face went pale, the mask of composure slipping away. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. She seemed trapped in her own lies, exposed under the harsh light of truth. I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes dropped, unable to meet his gaze as guilt etched itself onto her face. Michael took a deep breath, struggling to contain the anger and hurt swirling inside him. "So it's true?" he asked, his voice laced with pain. "All those nights, all those lies, it was him?" She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, Michael. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen." "Then why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Was everything we built together worth so little to you?" Her voice cracked as she tried to explain. "It wasn't about you. I felt like I was losing myself, like I didn't know who I was anymore. I thought maybe this would. I don't know, help me feel something again. But it was a terrible mistake, and I know that now. A mistake. Michael's voice was filled with bitter disbelief. We've spent nearly 2 decades together, Jessica. We built a life. You shattered it for what? Some thrill. Jessica's shoulders slumped, her guilt clear as she whispered, I know. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret this forever. Michael turned away, his heart heavy with a pain he could hardly bear. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Jessica. You've broken something that no apology can fix. A silence settled over them, the weight of their shattered relationship pressing down. As Michael walked toward the door, needing air and space, he felt a part of himself break, left behind in the home they had once shared. Michael spent the night driving aimlessly through the city, memories flooding his mind at every turn. San Francisco's iconic hills and bridges, once a comforting backdrop to his life, now seemed ghostly, each street reminding him of moments he'd shared with Jessica. Every landmark, the cafe where they had spent lazy mornings, the park where he had proposed, the apartment they'd first moved into, felt tainted, a reminder of a life that had been dismantled. By the time he returned home in the early hours, Jessica was waiting, sitting on the edge of their bed, her face streaked with tears. She looked up as he entered, her voice barely a whisper. Michael, can we talk? Michael stood in the doorway, every fiber of his being tense, a mix of anger and exhaustion weighing him down. Part of him wanted answers, but another part wanted to walk out and never look back. He crossed his arms, nodding stiffly, waiting for her to speak. Michael, I know there's nothing I can say to make this right, Jessica began, her voice trembling. But I need you to understand, this was never about you. You're an incredible husband, and I never wanted to hurt you. Then why, he asked, his voice rising. Why lie to me, sneak around? Was I really that invisible to you? Jessica looked down, her fingers twisting in her lap. It wasn't about you, she whispered, struggling to find the words. I felt lost. And when I met him, it was like I could escape everything, just for a moment. Michael's face twisted in disbelief. Escape? From what, Jessica? From us? From the life we built together? Tears slipped down her cheeks as she looked at him, her voice raw. I know it sounds selfish, but I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it would pass, but it didn't, and I kept lying to myself that I could handle it. A bitter laugh escaped him. Handle it? You had a choice every single day, Jessica. You could have talked to me. But instead, you chose to betray me. She sat in silence, his words cutting deep. You're right, she finally whispered. I made a horrible mistake. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that. I never stopped loving you. I was just lost. Love? Michael's voice was thick with disbelief. Jessica, love isn't supposed to feel like this. Love doesn't destroy everything in its path. They sat in silence, and Michael felt as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss of what their life had become. He wanted to leave, to escape the weight of her betrayal, but the years they'd spent together held him there, rooting him in place. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice quieter but filled with hurt. Jessica, I don't know if I can ever forgive this. You've taken something from me that I can never get back. Trust doesn't come back with an apology. Jessica nodded, her shoulders slumping, unable to meet his eyes. I understand, she whispered. I know it's too late, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. I need time, Jessica. I need space to understand if there's anything left to save. She simply nodded, remaining silent as he left the room. Each step away felt like a piece of his heart being torn from him. The night had brought a storm of emotions, and by dawn, he felt empty, his world forever changed. In the weeks that followed, Michael withdrew into himself, spending long hours at work, trying to escape the pain that lingered. Friends noticed the change, offering their quiet support, but he rarely spoke about what had happened, unwilling to share the burden he carried. Jessica, meanwhile, moved through their home like a shadow, attempting to make amends in small ways, but every gesture only reminded Michael of the chasm between them. Each moment in the same house was a painful reminder of what they'd lost. One evening, while sorting through some papers in his office, Michael found an unmarked box on his desk. Inside was a letter, written in Jessica's familiar handwriting, and her wedding ring, placed gently beside it. He unfolded the letter, feeling a surge of pain as he read her words, raw with remorse. Michael. I know there's nothing I can say to make this right. I broke something sacred, something we built together over years of love and trust. I don't deserve forgiveness, and I don't expect it. But I need you to know that every moment we shared was real to me. I loved you then, and I love you now, even though I failed in the worst way imaginable. I lost myself, and in trying to find my way back, I hurt the only person who truly mattered to me. If I could take it back, if I could undo everything, I would. But I know that's impossible, and I will carry this regret with me. All I can hope for is that someday you find peace, with or without me. I'm sorry, Michael. For everything. Jessica. As Michael finished reading, he felt a weight settle over him. Her words were honest and filled with regret, yet they did little to ease the ache that lingered. He placed the letter and ring back in the box, unsure if he would ever be able to look at them again without feeling the sting of betrayal. In the days that followed, Michael decided he needed to leave the house, to find space and distance. He rented a small apartment on the other side of the city, modest but far enough to give him the solitude he needed. Moving out was a solemn process, each box packed felt like letting go of the life he had once cherished. Jessica didn't protest his decision. She understood, standing by quietly as he gathered his belongings. The house felt emptier than ever once he was gone, and she knew that her choices had led them here, to a place where nothing could ever be the same again. For Michael, life in his new apartment was both isolating and liberating. The distance gave him room to breathe, to think without the constant reminder of betrayal around him. He filled his days with work and new routines, joining a local running club and pushing himself to focus on his health. The runs became a time of release, each step helping to unravel the anger and sorrow. Therapy sessions became a regular part of his week, allowing him to confront the emotional scars Jessica's betrayal had left behind. Slowly, he began to find moments of peace, even though the pain lingered like a scar that might never fully heal. For Jessica, life in the empty house was a relentless reminder of her mistakes. Friends grew distant, uncomfortable with the situation, and work became a struggle as her mind constantly returned to memories and regrets. She decided, after weeks of reflection, to sell the house. Once a place of joy, it now felt like a shell, a haunting reminder of what she had broken. Packing up her belongings alone, she sorted through the remnants of her life with Michael, each item a piece of the past she could no longer claim. On moving day, she came across an old photo of her and Michael, taken years ago in a park on a sunny afternoon. The memory brought a bittersweet smile to her face, and she slipped the photo into a book as a small keepsake, a reminder of what they had once been. After selling the house, Jessica moved into a modest apartment nearby. She joined a support group, seeking solace and understanding from others who had faced their own struggles, and focused on rebuilding herself. For the first time, she began to confront her fears and insecurities, recognizing that the emptiness she had felt was something she needed to address from within, not from anyone else. Though she knew Michael would likely never forgive her, she committed herself to change, hoping to learn from her mistakes and build a better, more honest life.